Quick here when there it is, the little red box comes up, and we're back in House Transportation on Tuesday, February 17th, 2026. And the rest of the afternoon is on public transit, particularly in the urban area. And we have Clayton Clark and his team from Green Mountain Transit in, and welcome back to committee. And we'll say that.
Thank you so much.
Yours.
Thank you so much, Chair Walker. With us today, we have Nick Foss, our Finance Director, Chris Damiani, our Planning Director. I was hoping that our Board Chair, Amy Brewer, would be able to make it, but she has a work commitment. She was not able to come out this afternoon. I was hoping that you could hear from her about her experience as the volunteer chair of the Board of Commissioners. For today, I'm going to give you a news update. We'll be talking about electric battery buses. I'm sure folks have questions. And then the real meat and potatoes is going to be looking at fiscal year 27 and 28. I can tell you I would be really happy with how things are going at GMT if it wasn't for this pesky money situation. We're doing a lot of good work, and Nick is going to go over the gloomier aspects of what our funding projections look like. Chris is going to, hopefully we'll have some time to talk about the fare revenue, getting back to some questions that the committee had in 2024 when we returned to fare service, letting folks know a little bit about how our fare system operates. And then we'll have some suggestions for moving forward. And so one of the things that's going to be different from my previous testimony here with you all is that I'm only going to talk about urban, and that's because our Franklin and Grand Isle service is already transferred to rural community transportation. Our service in Washington County is going to be, in Lamoille County will be transferred 7-1. That includes our seasonal service. This really is the source of a lot of my optimism moving forward for GMT and the rural areas that we are serving and have served. I think RCT and TBT are going to do a great job serving the folks in our rural counties, and I think that that's really going to give us the capacity to focus on our urban service in a way that's going to be a lot more innovative and will help us meet the moment. So let's get this out of the way. Let's talk about electric battery buses. And so we had, yep.
We have this. No, it would be posted after because I didn't get it. Okay, so.
My apologies. And so for electric battery buses, in November, we were informed of a recall of just the battery component of our buses. And the manufacturer of these batteries, in fact, recalled their batteries and then pulled out of the North American market, unfortunately. And so with the battery recall, what happened was that to make them more safe, they limited the batteries to 75% of a charge. And one of the things that they had noticed was that there was a higher risk when you were trying to charge a cold battery. And so they put a limit on having charging when the battery was under 41 degrees. And so one of the things that I want to make sure everybody knows is that we did not purchase these buses with that limitation. Some of what has been reported in the media made it implied that we knew going in that would be the situation. Really happy that New Flyer has been on site the past 2 weeks. And we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to get these things charging, even with the new safety considerations, and returned in service by the end of the month. One of the things I want to let folks know as a reminder is that our electric battery buses with New Flyer were part of a grant application that we discussed here a couple of years ago, and it's a 3-year grant cycle. And so the 5 buses that were temporarily derailed are part of the first order. There's 3 rounds of ordering. We've already made our second order, and so we're not able to cancel that order because it's already been made. They will be with different batteries. And so our expectation when those arrive is that they will perform better. But we do have a third year that we will be ordering under this grant. And we are going to take a look to see whether we want to continue with battery buses based on how easily we're able to get these back on the road and how they perform in the meantime. There's the possibility that we would look at hybrid buses as an option. One of the things that I want to emphasize before I stop talking at you and answer your questions on these is that since November, we have only had to drop 2 runs in urban. So not routes for the day, just 2 runs because of a lack of a bus being available. So yes, it has been really hard to do all of our service with 5 buses not these 5 buses not in our fleet, but it has not led to negative impacts for our riders except for just those two runs. So what questions? I am sure that you all must have questions about this, and I kind of want to get this out of the way before we dive into the other components.
Why even bother with these electric buses? They don't seem to perform well at their best. Obviously, these 5 are not performing at all. Why not just go to hybrid?
Well, because we don't have the option to do so with the way the grant is set up. First off, for the second round, we've already ordered, and if we were to cancel that order, there would be a fee that we would have to pay that we wouldn't be able to use federal funds for. Which would add probably a few $1 million to our deficit, which we would like to avoid. What I can say is that prior to the recall, the buses were actually fully meeting our expectations. And so, if this ends up being a temporary situation on a 12-year life cycle, then obviously having them not available 4 or 5 months is not great. But on the 12-year life cycle, that's sort of what we expect is that buses will be going in and out of service. But I think that you are right that before we make that third order, we're absolutely going to want to be seeing that the battery buses are something that we can rely on. There are going to be financial penalties if we switch to hybrid that we would have to pay more for, and so that will be a factor that we'll also take a look at.
Why are those penalties there? Because you've committed to electric buses?
Because my understanding, and we have an expert here with Ross, is that the 90% federal payback rate for electric buses, it's 80% with the hybrids, and so that we would have to come up with a higher local match.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Representative McCoy and then Representative Couch.
So do you know of any other electric vehicles that are used in other municipalities, be it New York or anywhere that
Yes.
are better than the ones that we have purchased, that we can purchase those types? And I'm talking Northeast because
Yeah.
it seems
Mhm.
weather is an issue.
Yes.
So,
Well, I think that weather is an issue just because of the 41 degrees, but it's not because of like the snowstorm that we had.
no, that's strictly, I mean,
Yeah.
we're cold in the
Yes.
Northeast. So if they're like Boston or
And so I know that Boston
Maine,
has them. I know that Springfield, Massachusetts is using some.
this particular brand or another, that's what I'm, are there other
Yes. So,
manufacturers there that don't have this problem?
so what I can tell you is that we have gone with New Flyer as the source. There's another major manufacturer, Gillig, and I don't want to get into the Ford versus Chevy debate over which is better. I think that Gillig may have a slightly better reputation in some areas. What I can tell you is that we are the only one of New Flyer's customers that didn't already have indoor charging established, and that's why we've had the biggest impact. And so as part of our fit up for battery, it was already scheduled that we would have our bus barn hardened with additional sprinkler systems so that it would be more fire resilient. And then we will be installing indoor charging. And once that happens, which will be before the next winter, then even if this 41-degree constraint is still existing, we won't have an issue with using them. So the new flyers are being successfully used across the country, and we're the only ones that have only the outdoor charging that's creating the situation.
Okay, so it's not, so it is not the weather. I mean, they could work in, say, 20-degree weather.
Absolutely.
Just because you can't charge them at 41 degrees.
Exactly.
Below?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
Okay.
so when we bring the buses into the bus barn, they'll be able to maintain that over 41-degree temperature, and they'll accept the charge.
okay, thank you.
A couple questions. One is, just how do the drivers and passengers, what's their experience with battery electric bus? And then the second one might be for Nick on, operational costs of a diesel. You gotta buy the fuel, but battery, you got other things. So those are the two questions.
Excellent. So I'll answer the first one or the second one first. We actually had somebody do a study to look at the costs of our diesel New Flyers that we received at the same time as our battery New Flyers. And we found that the cost to keep on the road and maintain, at least for that initial 6 months, was actually cheaper for the battery buses than the diesel buses. And so we do expect that we know that there's a risk here, and but if these work, they should work cheaper than our diesel buses. And as far as the driver preference, what I can tell you is that they haven't been super popular, but I think that is more because we have gone in the direction of having a barrier between our drivers and the public. And some of the drivers really love having that plastic door, but some of the drivers don't. And so what we see is people are generally avoiding it because they have a preference of wanting the safety door or not.
So the newer buses, which happen to be electric, now have these safety doors.
Yes, yeah, all of our newer buses are coming with the safety doors. And that will help with our insurance rating as well as, driver safety. It's something that our drivers will over time become, accustomed to. This will shock you when I've talked with drivers, what frequently is the criteria that they use for which bus that they're going to take that day is whether they like the seat or not. And so because they're in it all day. And so, and so exactly. So some folks prefer the older Gillig seat. Some people prefer the newer New Flyer seat. I can tell you when I'm on the buses and I'm on one of the New Flyers, I frequently have to is this the diesel or the battery? Because I can't really tell. So from the rider perspective, I don't see them noticing a difference at all.
Is there going to be a more formal, like maybe we can get UVM transportation group to once you have these buses for a year or so, just sort of do an actual comparison and be able to say, hey, it does cut down, or what percentage it does. Just, is it more cost effective in the long run or not?
One thing I'll point out on cost is where we've seen the biggest pressures is actually in commercial insurance. So these buses are typically almost twice the cost, so they're twice as expensive to insure. And then just our build up for inventory. So in your type of bus, we have to really add a lot of inventory in terms of parts. So that's kind of a one-time hit to cost. Those are kind of
For the record, identifying.
Oh, I'm sorry, Nick Foss, Director of Finance.
So there's, because they cost more, there's more insurance costs associated with it. And by they're new buses for you, so you have to stock up new parts.
Yes, and that is one thing we're concerned if we move to a higher percentage of our fleet being electric. Those are costs that we're going to have to find a way to pay for.
And it's one of the things that may be a deterrent from us wanting to switch that third order to hybrid, because then that would be another parts inventory that we would have to procure and have and maintain.
Representative Loudon is up next.
Like question got answered, thank you.
What's the difference between the three rigs in cost? Electric cost, diesel cost, hybrid cost?
So I don't want to do my memory, but we looked at that as part of our study, and I can get that back to the group.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Clay, these security, the doors for the drivers, is that a required or an optional thing on these purchases?
As far, I'm sorry, I was just seeing that Amy was able to join us. And what was your question again?
Well, hello to Amy, Franklin County resident. They're involved in a million things, Franklin County. Sorry, the doors, security doors, is that an optional or required on these new purchases?
So it is optional when we order them, but I think that we're going to, make it something that we are making the decision to do. So it's not like FTA says, hey, when you do your new bus orders, they have to have the safety meetings. But we're making that business decision to do so.
Why?
Because we've had 4 to 6 assaults on drivers each year since I've been here. We actually have video footage that we show you of somebody attacking a driver while they're driving a bus in city of Burlington, trying to hit the driver with a skateboard. They were in one of the buses that had the safety door, and the driver was able to pull off to the side with no incident, where if they just got clocked in the head while going down College Street, and super narrow street, who knows how many vehicles would have been taken out in that instance if we didn't have that safety door.
What was the time period on those attacks?
So I've been here for 3 years, and so since I've been here, we've averaged multiple ones the entire time of my tenure.
The most recent being?
We just had somebody who spent 2 weeks out because of an attack at the transit center. So that wasn't a driver, but that was one of the staff working at the transit center.
The ones on the bus, they occurred during kind of time frame?
Are you asking?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is the time frame that the testimony we heard before was all the attacks happened when the fares were free.
Okay.
And is that still the case, or have you had attacks since
We
we went back to charging fares?
So we are still having attacks, and what we have
They
noted.
were at the bus station and not in the bus?
What we have seen a huge decrease is no trespasses. And so that's where somebody is acting in such a way that we have to say that, hey, you can't use the bus. And so we've seen that those are well below half of what we had before we were operating when we were operating fare free. What we still find is that there are instances where there is conflict that elevates to physical confrontation on a pretty regular basis.
On these buses that have been in the news,
Mhm.
the 41 degrees came out entirely because of the recall.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Any,
Oh, Representative Keaton.
So, we understood when we bought these buses that they had to be stored inside.
nope, they didn't require being stored inside because they could be charged at any temperature when we originally got them. Yep.
So that meant that shouldn't say off budget, but that meant that you had to come up with the money to buy or to get a shelter for these things?
Yes, so the Lono program paid for both the vehicles and the infrastructure required at our facility.
I see.
Yeah, and paying that at the 90%.
Okay.
And so this is like an example of one of the things that I find relieving is that I've always been worried about a fire in our bus barn because, we could lose 70 buses. And having 90% of the cost paid so that we can have a much higher grade sprinkler system to protect the assets is something that I see as benefiting the whole operation, not just the
So
battery
then in
buses.
your sprinkler system, I assume that it is a chemical-based fire extinguisher
It's a water-based and
in lithium?
we actually had to increase the work with the city to increase the water flow that is there. And so it is
With lithium?
and so I can get back to you, but I know that the upgrades that were required all had to deal with water.
You had this engineered
Yes.
and you used water with lithium batteries.
I mean,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
To be clear.
At the breakfast show.
Yes.
Questions for our witness? I guess you're on to the next topic.
Excellent. But of course, if you do have other battery buses, questions I'll be happy to ask. I believe that you've already heard from Ross about the route performance report. One of the things that we've been working hard at in GMT Urban is making sure that all of our service is meeting the economic performance indicators. We have all but one of our routes for both local and commuter routes are meeting their performance indicators. And the one that's not, we anticipate ending in fiscal year 27. And key takeaways from the route performance report is that we do 2.2 million rides a year in our urban area, which is 44% of the state ridership at 21% of the cost. This isn't because we're magical. It's just because urban transit is the most, economically efficient based on the number of people that are being moved.
Representative McCoy?
So which is the route that we're anticipating ending, not the Representative Tomlinson?
So we anticipate the number 4, which is currently configured to be a Essex circulator serving the Essex Junction and the town of Essex. Previously, that circulator had also connected to Williston, but we changed that last year in the hopes that that change would improve the economic performance. It is not, and so that's why we will be looking at ending.
So are there any other bus routes that supply bus route to Essex Junction and the town of Essex?
So for the Essex Junction, the number 2 bus, which is our second most ridership, will continue to have service there. But it will not carry into the town of Essex. So it will connect to the Amtrak, to Global Foundries, and but will not go into town. And so that means that the town of Essex, one of our 8 members, will end up with no fixed route service. Just to let folks know of the previous efforts, we've reduced service by 19%. And so Representative Lally, I had told you yesterday that that was 16%. And after our meeting, Chris reminded me that I had not included the changes from the recent modifications to the 11 and the 1. And so that's why it's 19 instead of the 16 that I told you yesterday. So we've already reduced 19% of our urban service. We've had a 22% reduction in our driver FTEs through attrition. And we have eliminated 4 of our non-union positions as cost containment efforts to reduce costs other than just through service. I am happy that we're still receiving 4 of the 6 federal performance awards. That puts us in the 13th percentile for small transit agencies nationwide. The last year with 4, we were at 11%, but with having 4 this year, we're at 13%, still looking great nationally. That brings us in over $2 million a year in additional performance-based awards. What I can tell you is that the reductions that we made in fiscal years 25 and 26 were primarily on economically inefficient service. And so reducing that service actually increased our competitiveness for these stick awards. But when we start cutting additional service in the future, if that's necessary, we believe that will make us less competitive because our remaining service is highly economically performing. That sentence makes sense. I hope.
Yeah, thank you. Just going back to, so you were saying that all but one route is performing acceptably. And this one route in Essex will probably go away. My question is, how do you measure what is acceptable performance? Is that it's in the green or in the black, or because public transit, you're still relying on state subsidies. So
Yes.
yeah, just kind of.
And so what we do is that every year VTrans puts out the route performance report, which is like the report card for transit agencies. And so what they do is they take a look at all of our urban service, and then they come up with averages. And because we're the only urban service provider, it means that it's an average against ourselves. But basically, if service on a particular route is out of the range of the other routes, then it would be deemed unacceptable. And so, and it's based on the cost per passenger. And so when you look at our overall urban routes, I believe the average is about $7.48 per cost per ride. Our most efficient service is going to be like about $4 per ride. But that Essex service is about $28 per ride. And so that's where you can see that it's almost 4 times as costly per passenger as our other routes. And that's just because of the number of folks who are using it.
And did you say 8 members? I mean, are there 8 people who are going to be, was I misunderstanding you?
Oh, I'm sorry, 8 members, meaning that Green Mountain Transit is a municipality that's made up of 8 other municipalities. And so the town of Essex is one of the 8 members.
Okay. And when you're referencing cutting this route in 2027, any idea how many passengers would be affected by that?
I can tell you that it's averaging about 4 riders per run. And
4 riders per run and a couple runs a day.
it's
For
For the record, Chris Damiani, Director of Planning, it's about 10 runs a day. So there's 3 in the morning and 7 in the afternoon.
Okay, so about 40 people or
40 rides.
40 rides.
Yes,
So maybe 20 people.
yes.
And we've learned about other types of public transit, micro transit,
Mhm.
Gopher. Are you working with AOT to, like, will part of this transition be finding other more efficient rides for these 20 people?
So I can tell you it's not something that we've actively worked with V-Trans on, but it's something that internally we're doing. One of the things that we did last year is that we created an affiliated nonprofit that will give us additional options for fundraising, but also applying for grants. And what I see when I look at the town of Essex is not that public transit isn't a good fit for it, just that 40-foot city buses is not a good fit for that type of service. And so moving forward, there's no scenario where we're going to have something in place by the time that service is cut, probably early in fiscal year 27. But our hopes would be to work with the community to be able to find alternatives. And I'm going to speak a little bit about that later on, because we're going to ask for a statutory change that would give us greater flexibility in raising funds for specific service.
Representative Burke? And Representative Burke?
Yeah, on that point, I mean, could you rent vans for a while, or, are you thinking about purchasing vans? Would that be an option?
Well, one of the things that we're lucky in is that the town of Essex already does have a van, and they have used that to help with keeping their ADA costs low. So they already do have something in place that would be able to be leveraged to help with the replacement of that service if there were particular individuals, especially older or otherwise vulnerable folks.
So your 10 passengers might be able to have another option
Yes,
instead of just being without any.
yes.
You're all set?
Yeah.
And let's see. So what really worries me is that the multi-year federal surface transportation bill expires in September. And with about 2/3 of our operating and over 80% of our capital coming from the feds, we are dependent on what comes out of Washington. And I can tell you that not to get political, but there have been suggestions included in Project 2025 to zero out public transit funding. My hope is that certainly is not an outcome, because that would be cataclysmic for all transit in Vermont, not just GMT. But I've also heard that there are possibilities that we may see things that are positive for GMT in a new surface transportation bill. We heard last year when convening with other small transit agencies and getting briefings from the FTA and from folks that are active in monitoring the congressional activities, that one of the things that's being considered is increasing the performance awards. And so there's folks who are actively looking to perhaps increase those stick factors that we get, that $2 million get, and having that increased by 50%. If that would happen, that would be great for us. We're also have been told that there is a desire to have less federal funding for major metropolitan areas and more federal funding for small urban and rural areas. And so if that were to happen, it would be potentially a boon for GMT. And so one of the things that I think makes it very difficult for all of us as we consider not just fiscal year 27, but fiscal year 28, and I need to get out of the way so that you can hear from Nick on finances, is that we don't know whether we are going to be getting a lot less federal funds, more federal funds. It just makes it very difficult for us to predict what is going to happen. And I just want to make sure that folks are aware of that. And so with that, I'm going to get out of the way, and you're going to hear from Nick as he talks about how things are looking in 27 and 28.
Okay. Good afternoon. Again, Nick Foss, Director of Finance. I'm going to talk a little bit about our financial outlook, really just looking out over the next couple of years. I think I showed the slide the last time, but I did update it with more recent clippings. I just want to be clear, GMT is not alone in this. Really, public transit across the country is facing enormous challenges. I think a lot of it is, and I'll go over, the reasons, but a lot of it was driven by COVID, and the inflation that we've experienced since then. There's a number of other reasons. And even when I first arrived 6 years ago, facing financial struggles. However, they weren't at the scale that we're going to be facing over the next couple of years. So a number of reasons, and I'll kind of target each one a little bit, but I already talked about the inflationary pressures that we're facing, wages, benefits, everything's more expensive, and I think all of you know that. And then, we've really been able to get by over the last couple of years with great support from VTrans, but also we received a significant amount of one-time funds during the pandemic. So in 3 batches, really. So we got COVID relief funds, I think they were called CARES, CRISA funds, and then ARPA funds. And really, those funds solved the problem temporarily. They were one-time in nature. And we're really going to be entering a phase where we're getting back to our full level of funding, but our cost structure is much, much higher. The rural transfer is operationally positive, as Clayton talked about. I think, we are going to be able to focus, solely on urban transit, which is what we're good at. And so I think that's a great thing, but it's going to be financially challenging, and it has certainly added to our struggles over the next couple of years because we are taking on a lot more costs because of the loss of operating leverage. And then you might not be aware of, but legally we have to provide ADA transportation in Chittenden County. So the law states that within 3/4 of a mile fixture, we have to provide complimentary paratransit. We don't provide that ourselves. We contract that out with SSTA, but as I'm sure you're aware, the demographics in Vermont are skewing older. And so that service, the demand continues to rise, and our contractor that provides that service is not immune to the inflationary pressures that we've been experiencing. So just a couple, obviously this isn't all of our costs, but these are the big ones, salaries, benefits, healthcare, commercial insurance. You can see, since 2012, they've gone up exponentially. And so we have really struggled and have really only been able to support these higher costs because of those one-time funds. And now that those one-time funds are drying up, that is why we're looking at, down some very difficult years coming up. As I mentioned, we've been able to support these costs because we got significant inflows during the pandemic. So we got about $7.6 million in FY20. We've got 7.7 in ARPA funds as well as some CRISA funds, so a significant amount of money came in GMT. And on top of that, we get an annual appropriation from the FTA. And so we, for a couple of years, we're getting double the amount of money that we were used to. And so that has certainly helped us be able to deal with these higher cost pressures. But unfortunately, the government printed a lot of money, typically makes money worth less. And so inflation is long term. And so we are now having to figure out a way to continue operating our business and paying for it with a whole level of funding that, you know, it's just not sufficient to cover the costs that we're facing. And this is just another chart just kind of showing, you know, how we spent down these one-time funds over the years. So, as you can see, based off of our projections for FY26, these are year-end balances. We're really planning no COVID relief funds by the end of FY26. So that's why, you know, starting FY27 and really in FY28 is where we're facing, you know, this fiscal cliff. Talk a little bit about the rural transfer. As I mentioned, you know, we're certainly happy with the way that's progressing. It's happened in 2 distinct phases. So recently, the first phase, the St. Albans division was transferred to RCT starting on January 2nd. Washington County is planned to transfer on July 1st. The problem is because we were sharing a lot of overhead costs with the rural side. We are now absorbing that overhead onto the urban side. And unfortunately, we haven't received any additional funds to pay for that. So it's almost like the service reductions we did last year are now kind of almost entirely being offset by these additional overheads that are coming onto the business. As I mentioned, there's some positive things about it. I think we're going to be able to really focus solely on urban service. We're going to be able to shift resources towards improving that service and, you know, hopefully have some more management capacity to reimagine what, you know, GMT can look like in the future. But as I'm estimating about $1.2 million in costs that are going to be hitting the urban division as a result of that. This just talks a little bit about ADA, or just shows a little bit about the ADA costs. You'll notice, you know, they have leveled off, but you know, more than double since the pre-pandemic. So it's, you know, a reset of an expense structure that, you know, we're just not in a position to be able to support long-term with the current funding that we have available to us. Now talking about 27 and 28. So we passed a budget recently for 27. It had an $841,000 deficit. I am happy to say that, you know, management has worked to come up with some ideas of how to reduce that deficit. We've been semi-successful. So we really have kind of narrowed it down to 560,000 from the 840, but we still have some, you know, we need to still find some additional cuts. If we have to, you know, find that through service reductions, we're probably looking at about a 7 to 10% reduction in driver pay hours. But we're hoping to, you know, continue the conversation to find other ways besides service to, you know, close that gap for 27. 28 is when it really gets difficult, because by 28, all of the money, all of the federal funds that we've banked, thanks to the COVID funds, are really gone. We've got some funding that comes, you know, to us from VTrans that's running off in that fiscal year as well. And that is really what is driving that large uptick from, you know, the previous year of 560. It grows by about 2.7 to $3.3 million. You know, I will say that if I want to be clear, you know, if we find permanent cost reductions in 27, we really only have to find 2.7 of cost reductions in 28. However, if we were to solve that one time, you know, fund infusion, you know, find the full 3.25 million. So we really need to figure out a sustainable funding solution so that we're not having to constantly come up here to find additional revenues. As I kind of just mentioned, you know, what we're seeing is, you know, about a 10% reduction in 27. if we have to solve 28, that 2.7 with additional reductions, that's probably about 30% of our service. And the real kind of, and not on top of that, not just 30%, but about 11 driver positions as well. Sorry, is there?
Representative Burke?
Yeah, thank you for this presentation. So what was happening before the pandemic? I mean, were you in financial trouble then, or? is-
Not at the level we're seeing.
Is this because of inflation mainly?
Yes, primarily, it really is because, we've had some funding increases. We get, a substantial amount of funding from V-Trans. They've been very supportive of us, but the inflation has just, really, I mean, the driver and mechanic wages are up 30%, since the pandemic almost. Healthcare is more affordable, everything's more expensive, and we're just not seeing that in our typical regular funding. Our 5307 apportionments don't grow at 8-9%, a year. It's just, they don't mirror one another. And then also, the big other part of it is the rural transfer, that added a substantial amount of costs to the urban side. So that's kind of the other piece that's making, the 27 to 28 a lot more difficult.
I asked you that. And what was the, I mean, we talk about the rural transfer, but what was the reason for it? I forget.
Well, you want to speak to that, please?
Sure. And so Clayton Park, General Manager, so there was a variety of reasons. There was certainly the improving operational and having GMT Urban focus on what it does well and rural providers focus on what they do well. But there was also a belief that the rural providers would be able to do so more economically than GMT was. And so the hope was that whatever savings, or that by transferring this service to other providers, that there would be cost savings to the whole.
Sorry, I'm gonna have to go.
Representative McCoy?
Where it is in comparison to pre-COVID, like, what is it?
You want to speak to that?
Yes, Chris Damiani, Director of Planning. So ridership is down about 16%.
16?
Yeah, from pre-service cuts for, a year ago to what we are now.
Oh, you're probably.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because our service cuts were we tried to implement them at different stages, and so sort of across the year.
Okay.
Implemented different pieces of it.
Do you have a sense of why?
I mean, one of,
Talking about?
so one of the things that when people say what attracts people to the bus, it's the service itself. And so, by reducing that service, by reducing the hours of service 19% in terms of hours of service in the community, we're seeing that fewer folks doing it. And we're seeing that, I think for every 10% of service that we've cut in the past year, we're seeing on average 11.5% ridership reduction across all of our urban routes.
Representative Thomas?
Just a clarifying question on top of that. So you're saying that decrease was since the service reductions last August, or?
Yeah, so basically at the start of FY 25, we started service reductions then. And the last round of service reductions, which were primarily the changes to the number 1 and the 11, happened in August of this past year.
Right, okay.
Beginning of FY 26.
And what were the trends looking like before the service reduction?
Yeah, so right when at the end of FY 24, that was when we were starting to talk about service reductions. That's also when we implemented our new fare system. And so that's when we started to see that ridership reduction. During the pandemic, after FY 21, we were seeing year over year as folks were feeling more comfortable riding the bus, ridership was increasing. But we saw it increase.
It was also fare free.
And it was fare free, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's as we implemented fares and service reductions were starting, that's when we saw the ridership start to.
Okay, so kind of like pre-pandemic, ridership was steadily increasing, and there's a plunge with COVID, and then it was coming back. However, then it started to
When you
kind of tick
implemented
down with the fares
and
and
service cuts,
service
yeah.
reductions. Okay, and for every 10% reduction in service, you're seeing a higher reduction in
11.5%. Yeah,
because
exactly.
choice riders or folks who can no longer rely as the service becomes.
Correct. And primarily as we cut routes that had larger cuts in service, not surprising, we saw larger cuts in the ridership on those routes.
Thanks. Thank you.
What's,
I do just want to add, when we look at this slide and we talk about the fiscal year 28 deficit of 2.7 million, that doesn't mean that we'll need to cut 2.7 million in fiscal year 28. We have to cut that before the fiscal year starts in order to get that savings. And that's what makes the timing situation difficult because in order to cut that much service, we're going to have to be starting this August with the process.
with the amount of your previous on slides, there's the huge green portion that showed the amount of COVID money and ARPA money and pieces that came in there, and then these, what service levels were added or activity that occurred when you talk about reduction of service levels or increase in service levels, compared to what? Do we compare this to pre-COVID service levels, the amount of routes you had? Or was there an addition of or subtraction of services during this period? What are we comparing when you say services are up or services down or routes are cut? What do you compare that to?
So I'm gonna, Chris, if I'm going in the wrong direction, please correct me. So in 2020, just before the pandemic started, there were some service reductions that were made because we were in a similar financially difficult spot, but not nearly as bad as this. And I'm not aware, we did not add urban service since 2020. So it's not like when this money came in, we added routes. We just used this money to continue funding what was already existing. So it was a reduction from prior to 2020 service levels that we've been maintaining the last 6 years, or prior to the next round of service reduction.
So no service levels were increased or added as a result of any of the money that was input into the system.
The last time we had made major adjustments before the pandemic was in 2019. We had the Next Gen plan, and so that was a sort of reconfiguration of a lot of our service. There was I don't remember the exact percentage. That was the last time we've had a slight increase in service.
So in that piece, what's the total overall operating budget for Mountain Transit? System-wide, 70+ buses, and I don't know how many total employees they have?
So right now with both of us, we're at 180 employees, about a $31 million budget.
Yeah.
With about 20 million urban and about 11 million rural.
180 employees and 31 million and 70+ buses. What was it pre-COVID? What was it how many employees did you have pre-COVID?
I would say we weren't that much. I mean, we're definitely lower than we were at that point, I think. I mean, I would have to go back and look. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but we certainly have a driver fleet, or our driver base is much smaller than it was back then. Administrative staff's probably roughly mirrors what we have now. So but we can get all those numbers.
There was some level of reduction in administration. Is one of the testimonies that we've had since I've been.
But we've kind of rebuilt that. So
Okay.
And part of the way we rebuilt that is that the new positions that we've added, about half of them were paid for through a CCRPC program that pays them for 90% level, which is why we added them.
What's a percentage of your budget would you say that you spend in business development and marketing? And what I mean by that is, if it was a business organization, somebody would be going out and going after the institutions, the towns, the employers, the routes, the people on the routes, the homeowners associations, the entire piece. What percentage of your budget do you spend on putting riders into those buses?
single digits, probably. I mean, it's pretty small.
Okay.
I can tell you that upon my
Are you allowed to
arrival,
spend money in that area?
yes, we are. And it has been sort of one of the things that I've seen as a major, I don't want to say malfunction, but because GMT has relied on its assessment authority to generate local match, we basically have acted in such a way that we don't really have to go out and convince the community to provide more money, because we'll just send a bill to the municipalities. I think that that has really hamstrung us long-term. I think that that's why we're going to be asking for a tweak to the statute so that we can work on things outside of our formula for assessment. I think that this has been one of the reasons why we have been challenged for the past decade, because I think what you're referring to is that there was a 40% reduction in managerial staff from 2012 until my arrival. The people that went out in the communities to express why this was worth investing in were the positions that were frequently not filled. One of the things that I would like to do, and this is, I think, going to get to your point as a business owner thinking of return on investment, is that we know that we've eliminated 4 administrative positions that we are not really going to be relevant now that we're an urban only. And one of the things that I'm going to be talking to the board about is that now we have to invest in people that will actually go out, talk to schools, talk to large employers, talk to just the people that you listed, because we're not going to be able to continue operating just on governmental funds, either from the municipality, state, or the feds. We need to emulate TVT, RCT. They don't have assessment authority, so they go out in the community, they convince people that it's a good investment, and people make that investment, and we need to follow that model. It's also going to be extremely difficult for me to add capacity, administrative capacity, at a time when we're contemplating huge service reductions. But I feel that if we don't make this investment in ways for us to get that return, we can't cut ourselves out of this situation.
Well, I certainly would agree with that. You can only go so far.
Yeah.
And then you've got what to offer.
Yeah.
But I would certainly say that anything that I would want to, can't speak for the whole committee, I just speak. Anything to get out of the hole has got to involve that. It's got to involve a plan that says how you're going to help yourselves and how you're going to help the communities in that area. I have a really hard time telling the residents of the entire state to continue to float the budget for Green Mountain Transit that only services a limited number of communities if they're not also helping. I'm all on board and have been, and you get a lot of time in this committee at any request. Public transit is important to our climate goals, important to people who need it as badly, but you're going to have to continue. I appreciate your acknowledgement of that area. Any change or any funding has got to involve some plan to address filling them and working on that and getting a contribution from everywhere. It can't just be from the 200 plus other towns and taxpayers across Vermont. I appreciate what you're getting at there, and I appreciate the acknowledgement of that very much.
I will say we have been pretty recently successful with some with CAPA, their contribution has increased. The South Burlington schools districts or the Burlington school districts have increased their contributions. We get about 20% of our budget from local members of towns. So, we're certainly having dialogue with them every year, showing them the value of GMT.
And there's significantly more of a market up and down every single route that is going. You're passing every single building that has some opportunity that may or may not contribute to that piece. So it's a substantially large market to go after. And I certainly am interested in that. I'm sorry.
I would just add that, I think you all heard from all the RPCs last week about the intersection between land use planning and transit. And so one of the things that we've been doing is working with all of our local municipalities in Chittenden County as they develop these transit demand management policies, that GMT is at the table talking with developers so that as they're building housing, as the state is focusing on all these housing policies, we're talking with them of how can that be part of the mix to increase that revenue for GMT.
Representative Couch and Representative Loudon.
Yeah, the question, and just want to note that there was a statistic that you put up there that sort of said, in the rural areas, here's how much it costs per trip. And in the urban areas, it's about half or so. So, but it makes sense. But for every state dollar that goes into, you're going to move more people, and there's more people there. What is happening in other small urban areas around the country? Tell me something, are they all right about where we are? Are they doing anything innovative that's catching your eye? I mean, can't help but think when will we have buses on these general routes that don't have a driver? that just, so,
Well,
yeah.
just so that we're clear, I do not want our Teamsters business team to think that we are moving in that direction. What I will say is it was eye-opening to me when I went to a conference. It was my first conference since coming to GMT because, they cost money, and talked with other small transit agencies. First off, we got a presentation from the transit agency that wasn't there because they collapsed in, the previous year. We had folks that were there who were cutting 50% of their service that year. And so that was something where it's like, wow, I thought our situation was difficult. These folks have a challenge. Something that is not going to be helpful in the moment is that most of the places that seem to be weathering the challenges better are those places that created a dedicated funding source for public transit. But they did that decades ago. I don't know if we can do that in the current political environment, but especially the states that tied sales tax to public transit, they are able to weather things so much more. When I visited St. Cloud Metro, which is where the conference was, only 24% of their operating costs come from the federal government. So they are, if the surface transportation bill goes away, they survive. And that's because of the way they were forward thinking on that.
Okay, so, yeah, so what you've seen out there that works is when there's a funding source.
Yes.
That's dedicated, and we certainly have always stepped out, but I think you brought that up, that, we've had a lot of funding studies. Yes.
Representative Lau?
Yeah, I'm wondering about demand response at transit, and if that is something, if we have that tranche of the third group of these buses that we have not yet ordered. I mean, is this an opportunity to rethink some of this? I'm thinking about Route 7 and all the people who are driving because for whatever reason, the idea of taking the bus is inconvenient or, just very unappealing for some reason. We've lost those choice riders. We're living in an era where, it's the attention economy, right? I mean, everything is about attention. So convenience really matters for that choice rider. And this seems like if we could maybe switch a certain part of the fleet to what are they called? Sometimes I think Sprinter vans. I think I've heard Ross McDonald refer to them as, or something that's a little more nimble that could be used for a different purpose, so that just supplement the fixed route thing. I'm just kind of wondering if we're living through an era where, kind of what you're offering is a little out of step with what people's needs are and the way they live their lives. And if we need something a little more multifaceted, perhaps.
So I will say that even though it's not as sexy as microtransit, fixed route service is the cheapest way to move a lot of people between high density areas. To me, the question for GMT, and my hope is that we'll have the capacity to really think about this, is that in between those high capacity areas, there's moderate and lower capacity areas. And that's where I think that we would want to look at how our total business operates. So, for example, one of the things that we're studying is that we already talked to you about the ADA service. That means that SSTA has a fleet of vehicles that are operating within our fixed route zone that are helping people that are not using the fixed route. What some agencies are doing, and I'm sorry, Phil, I should have, Representative Potts, I should have mentioned this with what some other groups are doing to be innovative, is that they're combining their ADA with a microtransit, because you already have folks who are those vehicles that are out there. What I will say, though, is that even the most highly successful microtransit is a much higher cost per rider than fixed route. And so I think it's something that we may be able to get the community to value and the community to contribute for. But I think in this moment, it's going to be hard to think about adding a less cost-efficient solution right now. My understanding of that third year order is that we're probably going to be limited to comparable types of buses. So I don't see us being able to convert that from, say, 6 electric full-size battery buses to maybe like 12 e-sprinters or more. I think that we're going to need to stick with full-size city buses because of the constraints of that grant. But one of the things that I would say, and this is probably, I don't know how V-Trans will feel about this, is that when we saw some very innovative work with Community Rides Vermont, where they purchased their own vehicles. The nice thing is that then we're not asking V-Trans for money. We're not asking the FTA for money. And because they didn't get government funding, they're then able to use those vehicles in ways that we can't because of FTA prohibitions. And that's why they were able to provide service to schools. And, that's where I really think that we need to look in Chittenden County as well. And that may involve, looking at a more private fleet. But that's like, I like to fantasize about future, positive things, but it seems like a very distant, compared to considering our crisis that we're in right now. I don't want to seem like we're promising too much.
Yeah, this seems kind of like a service that could be tailor-made for our more suburban communities, which are going to take a while to transform into something, that has more,
Yes.
or, transit-oriented development nodes, it's going to take years. So, and I'm thinking, how you sell these communities that are not choosing to buy in at the moment, or, I'm just thinking ahead, my community, Shelburne, something that's a little more nimble might actually be something that there would be, they'd give you a hearing probably at the select board to just, a pitch, to hear your pitch. The other idea was, we are redoing our town plan and having, creating opportunities to help communities see the value of having, connecting these sort of cul-de-sac neighborhoods to the Route 7 corridor so they could catch the bus, making that easy would be super helpful if you could, you guys could kind of come and just speak to the planning commission or something one evening.
I was going to add just one other thing. So I think, Clayton talked about the economically efficient service that helps bring in those state factor dollars that are really important to us. And so if we're looking at it with that lens of sort of the traditional, really high rise routes, one of the things that we are doing in March is piloting transit signal priority in the town of South Burlington. So we hope to bring that to hopefully other places like Shelburne Road. And so we're really trying to make that choice for transit a really easy, quick trip by prioritizing the bus along this corridor. So this instance, we're doing it on Dorset Street, which, as you all know, sort of has some traffic congestion. We're hoping that bus can get prioritized through that project.
I only have 2 slides left. Can we go a little bit over? Or?
We already done that. We've done that, and we're
Perfect. I'll be very quick on. So I just want to point out some important risks to service reductions if that is the direction that we need to go in over the next couple of years. So the first one is, as Clayton mentioned before, we get about 4 stick factors. These are performance awards that we earn each year based on the level of service and the type of service that we do. And you can see that our apportionment that we get from the FTA is about, in 2025, is about 4.45 million. Almost half of that, or a little less, is based on stick factors. Now, if we have to cut service, that $3 million deficit that I showed you, if we lost all those stick factors, that could turn into 5 million. And quickly, we're looking at not a 30% reduction, we're looking at half of our service possibly being gone, and a lot more driver positions. The other thing you have to remember as well is we get over $4 million from our local member towns and cities, and it's going to be hard to sell on giving us the same or more money if we have to cut that much service. So those are just two important, items to take into account if we have to go, in that direction. And I lied, I only had one slide, so yeah.
So we have a $31 million budget.
Roughly.
20 million is in urban, which would be what we're pretty much talking about. 11 million is rural. Are you giving up all rural or is he?
Yeah, all rural is.
So you're 20 million.
Roughly, I
Okay.
wish I had my budget number. in front of
Okay,
me.
yeah, so that's what I mean. So 20 million, so you're telling me you get federal funding of 4.4 million?
Well, we get a lot more than that.
Okay, so what-
Because
that's
some
what I-
flows through E-Trans, which I'm sure Ross will cover.
That's state,
It's,
but it
no,
flows,
it's
federal flowing through. So I
federal
guess
and
those are the
state.
numbers that we can get it back to. If you
Yeah,
don't have it
we're
now, you
happy, we can
certainly-
send you all of our
Yes,
funds.
so that's what what's federal, what's state,
Sure.
what's local.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
No
Thank you.
problem.
The 4.4 million there is what makes that unique among the other transit providers is we receive that directly from the FTA,
Yeah.
where everything else flows through V-Trans.
Features. Okay, thank you.
And last comments, Clinton?
Well, I do just want to let folks know that we've already covered these things. So we're in a tricky spot where we're in alignment with the administration on the budget. We appreciate that they have added additional funds to us that would be above our normal baseline. Our hole would be deeper without that. So I don't want to make sure that you know that I'm not asking for additional funds. But one of the things that concerns me is making major long-term financial decisions before that surface transportation bill comes out. One of the things that may make sense is that before we go into another round of major service reductions, that we take a look at what the surface transportation bill does. So that may be a potential pathway to delay reductions. I had mentioned the simple statutory request. Right now, when you look at our statute, it talks about raising local funds through our formula of apportionment. We haven't been able to update that since 2006 because it requires 3/4 of our members to vote on it and approve it. We tried to update and 3/4 of our members, not the voters, but just the legislative bodies. We tried to update the assessment methodology last year, and we're not able to come to an agreement that would get us to that 75% threshold. What this will allow us to do is to be able to, so let's just say in the past week, Beta reached out to us and said, hey, we're going to have multiple campuses. We are thinking about hiring our own shuttle service, but instead of doing that, can we work with GMT? What we would like to be able to do is come up with a contract with them to provide local match that's not part of our formula for assessment so that we can raise revenue there. We're also looking at increasing our fare revenue. We have an internal goal of increasing our overall revenue from fares to 15%. We're hoping to do that primarily through unlimited access agreements. If we had time for Chris's presentation, one of the things that you would hear is that over 40% of our riders who get on our urban buses have their transit paid for by somebody else. That's because they're part of an unlimited access program through a school or an employer. And getting to your point of beating the bushes for creating more unlimited access agreements, that's exactly the type of thing that we would want to do. And then the rest is information that has to deal with our fare program, which is not super critical for your knowledge to work on the T-bill. But I think as the session progresses, if you have time and want to dive into who is using our service, the number of discount riders, whether they're cash-based or electronic-based, that's all stuff that we could walk through with you, but that'll be based on your interest. And so sorry to go over time. Sorry to hopefully not bump V-Trans, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just the language you're looking to change, do we have a copy of that or is it?
And so I had only provided that to the chairs this past Friday. And so I was hoping to get kind of their initial thoughts first, but I can share that with the group. It's just, there's two additions. but no amendment other, those conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Ross, how would you feel if we took like 5 minutes and then, all right, we're gonna adjourn and come back at 3:32.
You're just gonna say.